You're listening to Press This, a podcast that drives into the heart of WordPress and the community. I'm your host, Brian Gardner, WordPress advocate at WP Engine. Each week, I'll explore various topics, providing valuable insights and actionable tips for navigating the ever-evolving world of WordPress. You can subscribe to Press This on Red Circle, iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcasting app. You can also download the episodes directly from WMR.fm. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Press This podcast. I'm your host, Brian Gardner, and I am here delightfully today with one of my good friends in WordPress, design aficionado and fellow admirer of the WordPress block and site editor, Rich Tabor. Rich, thanks for being on the show.
Hey Brian, thanks for having me today. I'm stoked to start talking about WordPress.
Yeah, so I'm going to ask you a question. We're going to have a little fun here with the show. I'm going to ask you a question. It's going to be a 1 through 10 question, and then we're going to go back to that question after we do a little bit of intro on you. So today, as it stands, so WordPress 6.6, not including Gutenberg and all of that, on a scale of 1 to 10, how do you rate WordPress as a design tool?
You mean, is this like I'm supposed to answer with an integer value, or...
just on a scale of 1 to 10. 10 being like Figma, like the creme de la creme, and 1 being worthless. So, yeah.
No, it's definitely not worthless. I would say, like a 6 or 7.
Okay.
Yeah.
And let me follow that up really quickly and say 5 years ago, right around WordPress 5.0 or maybe whatever, what would you have given it then?
It was a very different tool then. The design was mostly in the hands of whoever built the site, and that was about it. So I would still say, maybe, if we're talking about empowerment of the site user, like whoever's building the site and using it, then it was much smaller, maybe like a 2 or 3. But if it's, the capabilities of WordPress are still on par, where they were 5 or 6 years ago.
Okay, that's fair. And we'll come back to that here in a second. Rich, you are in charge of, or as part of the leadership team that deals with product at Automatic, which at this point is mainly focused on the WordPress project. Give us a little bit of a synopsis on who you are, how you came to WordPress, and sort of what you do currently at Automatic. And from there, we'll kind of weave ourselves into the design conversation.
Yeah, sure. So I started doing web work back in the days of front page and whatnot, just kind of exploring and seeing what was there, MySpace profiles, etc. Eventually got it a little bit into WordPress, mostly around the theming front. I was really curious about the idea of design and websites and trying to find the intersection of the two that best suited what I wanted to do. So learned a little bit from an agency doing some marketing work and building and designing, mostly designing at that point, a bunch of websites and landing pages and whatnot. And then from there kind of built my own themes and sold themes for a number of years. And when Gutenberg was kind of turning the first corner, it was time to jump on block development. So dove into React, JavaScript, trying to find my footing there and figure out how I could best have an impact on this future of WordPress. And we're here today, this future where it is block based, and there is an avenue of WordPress that is very different from what it used to look like 5 years ago, even when Gutenberg first came in. But yeah, so I just build products. I just enjoy it. It's just really what I do.
So many folks here are very familiar with Mike McAllister. He's got a product called Ollie. I group people like you and I and he into generally the same category. Correct me if I'm wrong. We are generally more designer than we are developer. Capable of building for sure, but if it just seems like the three of us have, and you guys are leagues ahead of me in terms of design capabilities and all of that. I love everything you guys do. Is that true? Is that a true statement that you're more a designer than you are a developer?
I think on my blog I say the fancy multidisciplinary intersection of product design and engineering. I would say I really am kind of at the middle point of both, with product being the center, really the experience. So if you count experience as design, then sure, I lean that way. But if you count experience as engineering, then I lean that way. For me, it's kind of an intersection where all those three pieces kind of are interconnected. You can't just have one or two even. Otherwise, you'll be in a rough spot.
Yeah, so there's sort of the old adage or running joke in conversation in the tech space for people like us. In a room full of developers, I am a designer, and in a room full of designers, I am a developer. And that's generally true for me, maybe for you as well.
Yeah, that couldn't be more accurate.
That's right. And I kind of think that people like us are dangerous, both in a good sense and a bad sense. And for me, I like the ability to have both skills, but it also means the sea is more wide open. It means like the capabilities and the creative brain can go in all kinds of different directions, because I'm not necessarily limited by my development abilities when I want to design, and then vice versa. Like, oh, well, I can develop this easily, but I can also make it look good, which makes sometimes shutting the computer at the end of the day, or even, at the end of the workday, tougher. And so given that you and I are slacking sometimes at 11, 12 o'clock at night, I feel like you kind of know what I'm saying here.
Yeah, like the part I try to lean on, and something I've been since I was at GoDaddy for a couple of years, and then I'm at Automatic. Something I'm really been pursuing is like scale. Like how do you scale across design and engineering, and helping move progress and across teams. And so something I'm trying not to get too caught up on is the small details that I need to record them and share them and stuff. But how do I like get more of that out of team members and kind of inspire in that sense? So that's just been something personally I've been challenging myself with.
It's actually a pretty good segue here, because I asked you to come on the show so we can talk about WordPress as sort of a design tool, not necessarily a design replacement for other programs, but just given where it's at and all of that. I feel like where WordPress is now, it is actually kind of what you described, sort of the intersection of design and development, way more than it ever used to be in terms of enabling the user to do the thing. I mean, previously, WordPress was more, HTML, PHP, and CSS based, and themes were built that way. Custom sites were built that way. And you really had more of a user or a customer, and then like a developer or builder. But now, and this is where WordPress is and is continuing to go, you have a tool that resembles more of, the Wix and Squarespace and Webflow and Framer, that kind of a thing, where the software is enabling the user to do design things. And over the last several versions, we've seen those capabilities get better and stronger. So where do you feel right now we are along that journey? Do you feel good about it? Do you feel great about it? Do you feel like it's okay, but still so much room for improvement? And then we'll sort of just break down and kind of get a little more granular and talk about like what are the actual design capabilities of WordPress as it is right now.
I mean, those who work with me daily probably know that I'm one of WordPress's biggest critics. I'm close to the product. I see it every day. I'm working in it every day. And one of the things I keep pressing on is leaning in on simplicity and on intuitiveness. We have a lot of controls. We have a lot of, quote unquote features that we've added over the last 5 years. Some of which, propel WordPress ahead. Some of which are just catching up. But in all that, the one thing that I really want to push on from a product perspective is to create that sense of intuitiveness, to create those moments where you use WordPress, you try to do something, you drop in a block, and then you're like, like that helped me do something that years ago would have been difficult to do, or very, very challenging. So really leaning in on the intuitiveness is where I think the biggest opportunity is. Design-wise, we have a lot of controls and stuff. We just over time it's just kind of stacked on top of each other, and now it's kind of this refinement phase I see coming up.
What do you think is the biggest, I'm going to ask both sides of this question, the biggest feature, but the biggest empowerment of WordPress today, and what is its biggest limitation? It's kind of a big open-ended question, but I figured let's get into the nuts and bolts of it all.
The whole concept of, it's kind of two-sided, the concept of a block theme and having everything editable at the block level, so you can go into your header, change your logo to the right or to the center, edit your footer, move things around, change your entire templates all from a UI. It's probably one of the biggest advantages. And with that comes global styles and being able to skin a theme and have those same JSON styles applied to another website or even another theme, and shared between the two. I think that those are the biggest wins on like the style side and the building side. But the with those two, strength becomes also probably the two hardest elements of those, or the most difficult part is that you can do that you can select all the blocks in your header and move them around, or you can accidentally delete your content or delete your footer. Like there's these, this experience layer on top of the tools that we need to refine and push further a little bit more to where it still is empowering as the original vision of, being able to edit your entire site with blocks, but then also not restrictions, but almost guardrails to keep you in the right lane. Unless you want to go out and do your own thing, then sure, like WordPress is extendable, and you can delete your entire template and start fresh, and that's totally cool. But I think that initial experience and that intuitiveness is something that we need to push in on.
I have spent a good amount of time researching and playing with the Create Block Theme plugin. This plugin, for those who are listening, essentially gives you the ability to install a theme, make some changes, and export it out. It does several more things than that, including, and this is where I'm kind of going here, including the ability to literally start with a blank canvas. And so when you use that option in the Create Block Theme plugin, Nick Diego and I talked about this one of the episodes ago, it's actually kind of mind-blowing, because really what it does is it just sets up a basic WordPress theme with an index file, it kind of like no styles, and then it's really just a start from scratch thing, which for we'll just say that the hobbyist user, somebody who's just trying to get an online presence site up, that might be a little bit overwhelming. But for those who are like, hey, I literally want a blank canvas to design my theme or website, WordPress and the Create Block Theme plugin allows us to do that as well. Do you see any future where capabilities, and I know that you can export a theme now, but the full capabilities of that plugin will end up in WordPress core?
Yeah, I think that there's going to be some overlap, and eventually some of the functionality will move into core, I'm sure. I do think that there potentially is like a toolkit for the advanced creators, the folks who are building these themes out. That isn't quite suited probably for core. That's one of the great things about WordPress, is that it can morph into what you need it to be. But I know, yeah, like you said, like Create Block Theme is a very interesting project, and Automatic has some of the best theme designers, apart from you and Mike and a few others. They've been leveraging it and helping to build it and push forward the changes that need to happen, because Automatic's pushing a theme or two a week at this point, and really kind of leaning forward. But yeah, I think there's something to bringing some of that to core for sure.
One of the things I love about WordPress now, and it took us some time to get there, because several versions ago we had the basics in place, but the refinement and the parity of what settings and style controls are in theme JSON and marrying them up with an actual user interface inside of the site editor via global styles. If theme JSON could register a color palette, it would be nice for the user in the dashboard to be able to edit that. And one of the recent changes, one that's coming to WordPress 6.7, would be things such as the font size, right? Where theme JSON has had that capability for quite some time, where you can register the font sizes for the theme, but unless you actually got into the code and changed that, you were unable to do that inside of the dashboard. And these are the types of things, and I've talked about this in the last couple episodes, that excite me from a design perspective. Not myself, because I'm capable, as we discussed early, to kind of go into the code and write it all out through theme JSON or whatever. But what it really allows us to do as leaders in the space is teach people how to design a site with WordPress. And the fact that these controls, these settings are now available as user interface pieces is extremely helpful. And I know there's a lot of ongoing work relative to refinement, user interface, user experience sort of stuff. Do you want to, and I know you've been part of that project, which is to go through and click all the buttons and to see where there might be opportunities to even make very small improvements, but ones nonetheless make WordPress better.
Yeah. I think the font size presets control is really interesting. I think there's something to be said, for global styles to be able to configure every piece of a theme potentially. I think maybe we're at 80 or 90% of what's possible in the JSON file. And when I look at global styles, all I see is the UI for theme.json, more or less. And I think if we make that UI just a little bit simpler and a little bit more intuitive, it'll be easier for people to use and also potentially export their own themes or share themes across sites, or be able to make changes on sites instead of having to dive into the code and push changes and try to validate, the code on the server versus the code that's local. Like, there's a lot of workflow things that we need to iron out when it comes to all this, and some of that work is kind of the phase 3 collaboration and workflows effort. But really, I think as a design tool, it's evolved quite a bit, and I think there's always things that we can improve. But at the same time, we're theme-wise, like theme creation-wise, like we're at a pretty good spot, in my opinion.
I know that WordPress is not out to feature parity Figma. And I know that Figma has become sort of we'll call it the relative de facto design tool, sort of replacing Adobe Photoshop and Sketch and all that kind of stuff. And I know that a lot of people have in various conversations, they've said, oh, I wish WordPress was more like Figma, which is kind of a ridiculous statement when you think about it, because they're really two different things. However, one thing I have appreciated, and this is a little bit less of a design piece, but the ability to rename groups and blocks inside of like list view, which actually, as you kind of create layers and components in Figma, is a little more parity there. But the user interface that we're talking about is what really excites me. And I can make the case to some degree that unless it was like a really sophisticated project, there's almost not a need to use Figma at a light level. Would you agree?
Yeah, the best part of Figma, is, well, there's two great parts. Like, one is speed. If you're super familiar with this thing, you can use it fast, right? And you can iterate and come up with lots of quick ideas, kind of ideate a lot. So it's great for that. And it's also great for prototyping. And so if you're building applications and trying to really flesh out some ideas, I think it's a wonderful tool on both of those fronts. And obviously as a design tool, it's like you said, the de facto tool. But when I think about like the future of WordPress, like potentially you can leverage WordPress as the design tool. Not necessarily having to use Figma. I'm sure, I think there's folks that want to come up with 20, 30 different ideas like fast and try to feel out what works well, and that's fine. But it'd be super awesome if WordPress was that intuitive to use as a professional tool. Figma is a professional tool. Like, someone brand new to Figma would be just as familiar with Figma as someone brand new to WordPress, in my opinion. Like, we do have a lot of learning that goes on to developing these tools and getting very, very used to how they work. But I would still say that Figma is a much more easier to use tool than WordPress is right now. And it's a very different animal when it comes to publishing and whatnot. But I think, yeah, there's validity in having like a WordPress first design process.
I actually use Figma now more for things that I used to use like Adobe Photoshop for, and less for like website design, and more like, ideating on like logos and branding and stuff like that, in which case It's a wonderful tool, easier than Photoshop and or Adobe Illustrator, and certainly nothing I expect WordPress to ever come close to being able to emulate. But you and I have been friends for a long time. I'm a huge advocate, as I know you are, because I know you're responsible for some of the wireframe patterns that exist over on WordPress.com. I'm a huge proponent of wireframe patterns, and so therefore I have a theme called Frost and a theme called Powder, which sort of embrace that, which really, in my mind, was like, I have a matching Figma file, but it's gotten to a point where I'm like, I just don't know that I would recommend going to Figma to do the work and then having to go back to WordPress to do the same work, some of which is even easier in WordPress than it is Figma. So there's just a duplication of effort there. And I know that there's been, and I don't know if you're familiar with any of the work here, but at one point there was kind of a hope that you could design in Figma and then like click a magic button and have it turn into a theme using tokens and stuff like that. I don't know the feasibility of that. I don't know the maintainability of that. Do you have any sort of insights into that?
Yeah, I'm sure there's some interesting solutions out there. I've seen a few that do that. It's essentially taking variables and putting them into JSON format, the theme.json format. I mean, I'm sure that's viable for workflows, for agency workflows, for folks who potentially are designing, like a style guide first. If you're trying to figure out the brand colors and the text colors and trying to figure out like what's the fonts and how are these going to work, then sure, I think Figma is a great place for that. We do have a style book in the WordPress experience. It needs a little bit more rethinking, in my opinion, but it is like a nice experience to see all your headings, all your paragraphs, the buttons and whatnot, and kind of configure from there. So I do see, some validity in like the ideation part, but yeah, I think, it's not, I don't think it's a future workflow to be designing, these sections of a site, these patterns as individual components in Figma, but more or less, having like the vibe, having the style. And in WordPress, you're creating more of these patterns. You're creating what you need in the moment even, or what you need soon, instead of having to go through like a design process flow and then approval and then coming back into WordPress and then creating it.
All right, so let's talk about the current state of WordPress as a design tool in the sense of, and we can work our way towards your 720 design configuration theme that you're the brainchild of. And really more about that is about the capabilities of WordPress, with typography presets and color presets and what are we calling them these days? Style?
Well, they're all style variations. They're either theme style variations or block style variations. These color ones, I'm basically color variations, or typographies like typography variations. Just trying to keep the terminology as lean as possible. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. That's a problem we've had with WordPress for some time is slinging words around and then saying, oops, that's not the greatest word for it, so we'll call it something else. And then you get people who are confused. But let's talk about that. Let's break down your 700. It's called the Assembler theme. It's available, I believe, on .com. Talk to me about that and what it showcases in WordPress's current feature set.
Yeah, so Assembler is a very interesting project I worked on. The idea is to have one theme that has a lot of variability. So essentially, you can compose 720 or so unique theme styles. That's a combination of colors and really typography settings individually to come up with those different unique styles. And so I wrote a post. It's rich.blog/720-themes. And really, I'm just like showcasing like this is what's possible with very little effort, like with 45 JSON files and for colors and 15 or so for typography. And then in that combination, like the idea that you can maintain something that's this composable, like this big, in such a simple manner, like the JSON file is really interesting, especially for processes and applications where scalability is important. Like for a host who's trying to build out, WordPress theme styles and themes for users to pick from, or even from theme shops, or even for agencies who are like, well, maybe I can maintain all the vibes that we use across the different agency work. We can put into this one theme and have one file that really that controls it all. And then at the same time, like when you take this idea of this, JSON format of style, that it's much easier to see a future where it's you can manipulate it with AI potentially, like where you can create more of these from a prompt instead of having to actually style it yourself. Like if you said you wanted your website yellow, like could it find the elements that need to be yellow and change it yellow? And if you want less yellow, it finds different elements to make it less yellow. I think that's all feasible with the system that we built today.
Yeah, AI is probably a separate conversation, a separate episode. And I have my own, being a designer, or at least a person with a design mindset, I still struggle probably in the same way copywriters do when you use, things like ChatGPT to generate copy. They're like, but it's not the real thing. Like it's not the human thought, emotionally driven choice. In which case, most people don't care because it's all about speed, at least for them. But for people like me, people who are pure creatives, I'm like, I really don't love the idea of a prompt that says, create me a church website using black and orange as colors with a serif font and just having AI do its thing. Because I don't know, not 9 times out of 10, but I don't know that I would necessarily trust it. I think a lot of people don't care or aren't as particular as I am about that. And so I'll just kind of let that one go. But
well, I think what you did, that prompt example you just said, I think is not far in the future, to be honest. And really, it's not like, and maybe the first stage of like a well-designed system is inputs that are like more like a similar or some other theme like Frost, where you do have like your own definitions of color, and it evolves from there rather than picking random colors. It's all about the inputs.
Sort of off topic for half a second. I mean, still design a little bit less WordPress specific. Do you have any thoughts on Tailwind CSS and the whole movement over there, just in terms of like color theory and all that?
Yeah, I think it's fine. I've used Tailwind on a number of projects over time, and it's if you're very well familiar with Tailwind and also with theme.json, you can draw some similarities in a sense of having in a like a I think it's either JavaScript or JSON driven style declarations, and there's a lot of parity there, so I think it's fine. The biggest difference is we have a little bit more prescriptive block styling, so it's per block versus coming up with something that's a bit wider. But if you use presets, even exclusively, I would say most like sites that you're doing for production, like if you're doing something for a client or whatnot, I would lean heavily on these presets, which are almost the exact same as setting them up in Tailwind, in my opinion.
One of the parts of my job is, I assume it's yours as well, is when you talk to people who are like at the agency level, small business, more than just a one person, or even, a really sophisticated design development shop that's one or two people, is the ability to easily via create block theme or just literally locally, just like cloning a theme and then making it your own. And I think, and I talk to people a lot about this because I have, Frost and Powder, and, we've to death have talked about the conversations around parent-child themes and whether they're necessary or not. I like talking to agencies and really encouraging them to sort of create their own theme or framework per se, where they, Web Dev Studio is a good example. They forked one of my themes and they just made it their own base theme for it's called WDS or something like that. And this is the power of where WordPress is at now, with templates and patterns and JSON files and these variations, where you can have like an internal library for like the agency, where you could just pick and choose which things you want to kind of plug into a particular site. I think that's one of the things that excites me most about WordPress, outside of the sort of the hobbyist controls, is the ability on the other side of it to really like understand how WordPress is built, how block themes are built, how easy it is. I use the phrase copy and pasteability, not really a phrase, but in terms of saying, oh, I can just grab this file and stick it in this theme and it works, right? Like, how do you feel about that?
No, certainly on the way that WordPress has been moving. The idea that a theme is entirely composed of parts. It's templates, it's template parts, it's patterns, it's colors, it's fonts now. With the typography styles. But then like the next big thing, and we're kind of at this point with most parts of the theme, but the idea that you can reuse these parts across themes. So like having a section style or a pattern style that's applied to one theme now can be used on another one, or even parts of patterns. That's why we have these pattern libraries like at WordPress.com. There's a pattern library. WordPress.org has lots of patterns, and I know Frost and also Ollie. Everyone's kind of building patterns now. And the idea that they are limited to one theme is kind of, in my opinion, perhaps a little bit shorter-sighted. Like the long tail of this is that I could drop a pattern on any WordPress site, and the styles are inherited by the theme, and everything looks fine. And like I can have like a newsletter pattern from you, I can have a gallery pattern from me, and a call to action from Mike's Ollie theme, and put them all together, because that's how I want to compose my page. And we're almost to that point. I think we need to open up templates a little bit more, so that when you see a beautiful blog template, maybe you can grab that template and use it on your blog instead, and make that easy to do. Whereas today you kind of have to copy and paste or build out something, in a sense, which isn't quite as ideal.
It's the same software, but it's so different, right? Like, from 2006, there's still all the code that is there. And I joke that WordPress is backward compatible to a fault. And, there's probably moments where I'm like, at 5.0, when Gutenberg came out, it should have been forked of itself and called like WordPress Pro. That's a whole different conversation, which would have introduced a whole nother round of confusion for people. In the end, I love where it's at. I love where it's going. I mean, you and I have been around WordPress probably together for 40 years, probably. We've seen it run its full gambit of things. And so any last parting words just around, WordPress design, anything that you think, might be coming or that might get people excited, let us have it.
Yeah, on the design front, I'm really been curious about how can we, still have the flexibility and the design controls that we have today, but then also better support either folks that are newer to WordPress or clientele that don't necessarily need the full, foundational elements of the editing experience. So I'm really leaning in on some ideas there. I think that there's some concepts around section styles and really being able to theme whole parts of your site all at once are really interesting to me. But really, the one advice I would give for everyone is to try a block theme. Like I have a new theme I released recently called Kanso, Kanso, and it's a simple theme. It's just a blog, just like my blog at rich.blog, and just try a theme like that. Like find out how to change the colors, how to change the typography, and then dig into it if you're curious. Like I look into the JSON and see like how is this thing configured, because it really is eye-opening when you see how composable these pieces are and how they come together to create a beautiful end product. But then you can also take that end product and morph it into whatever you need. And I think that that's like the beauty of where WordPress has been headed, and where we're kind of seeing the apex of where we're seeing that vision through. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, literally this morning I download themes regularly from .org, many of which were from Automatic this morning, just to see how people are doing things. And I think that's probably one of WordPress's biggest and sometimes most frustrating features, is that it can be built with and used several different ways. And it's kind of a weird statement, but it's almost like there's no wrong way to WordPress. There are many ways to WordPress, which you and I have had several conversations around. Should we do it this way or that way? And it kind of like the Scarecrow and the Wizard of Oz. People do go both ways, right? Like it can work both ways depending on how you need to use it. Even from a design tool perspective, I love use the controls. You can build with theme JSON. You can do all sorts of things with it. And I think the future is bright. I think at one point Matt said several years ago, the future, the road ahead of WordPress is a lot longer than the road behind it. And that's a pretty bold statement. But as far as I know, you and I are still here for it, right?
That's right.
All right, everybody. Well, Rich Tabor, product at Automatic, one of the people who is a thought leader in the space, a brilliant designer, somebody who I am thankful is part of the project because it allows it to move forward in a way I hope it goes. And so, again, thank you for being on the show, Rich. Give us a couple of places where people can find you.
Yeah, I blog at rich.blog. It feels like I have the coolest domain. And I tweet... or whatever we're calling it, post on X/Twitter at Richard_Tabor, TABOR.
That's a wrap for today. We're gonna cut it a little bit short, not really, because I think we gave a lot of information here. And continue to listen to the Press This podcast. We go into the community both from a product perspective, from a business building perspective, and we talk about the ever-evolving world and landscape of WordPress, where it's been, where it's going, and how people like you can use it to make money, to build websites, and everything in between. Thanks again for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.